Hi, so my name is Adrien Treuille. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I'm also working a lot on self-driving cars. So I'm helping to train our future robot overlords. And so I was wondering, I'm sure you're wondering what kind of jobs will be available to us once they take over. And will it just mean clicking on images all day long for them? And I'm here to tell you that actually there are really many very, very interesting things that humans can do that computers can't do well. Very complex tasks, actually. And one of the very interesting frontiers of citizen science is to explore these kinds of rich, creative, complex tasks that humans can do that computers can't. So I'm going to talk about crowdsourcing science, of course, and the first problem I'm going to talk about is protein folding. So as you may know, proteins are these essential chemicals in our body, and they form into these very, very detailed and complex shapes in our bodies, which determines how they carry out basic functions of biology. So the famous protein folding problem is given the blueprint for a protein, which is a set of amino acids. Figure out what shape that protein will fold into. And solving this problem is not only really a key to understanding how life works at the molecular level, or at the cellular level, but it also requires really, really vast computational resources. Okay, so typically the way proteins are folded for scientists is on large arrays of computers working together to solve this difficult problem. But the protein that you see here is not being folded by a computer alone. It's actually being folded by a 14-year-old boy in upstate New York. And this is a computer game we created called Fold It. And this boy is one of over hundreds of thousands of players who are competing together to fold proteins and help solve this problem. So that's one interesting citizen science problem. Here's another one, RNA nanoengineering. Now this is the opposite. Given some shape that a molecule can fold into, what is the blueprint, what is the sequence of nucleotides in this case that would fold into this shape? How can we design or nanoengineer molecules to a specific specification? And this is a very important problem from the perspective of creating next generation catalysts, drug responsive control elements, and we also created a game to solve this. And the way this game works is that you design a molecule in the game, which is called Eterna, and then every week players vote on which molecules they think are most likely to behave properly in the competition. And then we actually synthesize those molecules every single week and score the players based on how well the real molecules they designed behave properly. And so if you think about this process, which is all the way from hypothesis to design to experiment to validate it, in fact, we're actually crowdsourcing the scientific method itself and sort of exporting it to hundreds of thousands of people. And this slide is 5 years old, so excuse the small numbers of players, but Fold It was launched in 2008. It was a protein folding problem, and it at the time had reached 300,000 players, and it's in sort of the space of computational chemistry. And then Eterna was launched in 2011. It has 70,000 players, but now actually several hundred thousand, and it's an experimental chemistry. So we're actually running experiments in the loop of the game. And I want to basically tell you a little bit about the experience of creating these games and perhaps about some of the things that we learned making them, which really surprised us. So the idea was, well, we have a scientist who has some kind of problem, so all they have to do is make it into a game, which is obviously really easy. And then people will solve that game, and then science will happen. And as it turns out, what really happened in the process of designing these projects was much, much more wonderful and crazy. And basically what happened was the players broke the game and changed the way that we thought about doing the science, and that led to new scientific projects, which led to new papers, and the whole thing became this crazy loop, and all sorts of nonlinear things came out of it. And it was really 100 times more exciting than any of us could have imagined to work on this. So I'm going to give you an idea of what some of those interesting, surprising things that came out of it was. But one of them was that actually it turns out that we could find people who were really very, very good at these esoteric and complex projects. So I'm going to give you an example from Eterna. So we had a bunch of humans design RNA molecules, and then we tested how well those molecules did. And so the humans are in blue, okay? And the higher the score that you get, the better the molecule. And I can explain that later. Okay, and we also had the computers design some molecules, and they were trying to solve the same problem, because we want to be honest, who's doing better? And as it turns out, neither the humans nor the computers did very well. They were kind of all over the map, okay? So this is a difficult scientific problem. Computers don't do well, humans don't do well, okay? And actually, to be honest, this was truly a moment of fear, because our hope was the humans are going to do a lot better than the computers, and they were going to publish papers and be famous. Turns out everyone was terrible at this problem, so what can we do? So, well, we had the funding, so we kept running the game to see what happens. And what happened was, at this point, one of the players said, look, we players are doing very badly. And we have this amazing experimental resource open to us. We should actually pay attention to it and use it. So one of the things that the players did was they said, let's build RNAs with a lot of GC pairs. So these are very, very strong pairs. It seems like a good idea to do this. Turns out that real RNAs are not like this at all. And so the players decided they invent their own scientific argot. So they said, we're going to call these Christmas trees, because they're colored red and green in the game. And this player said, Dimension 9, he said, let us not waste our experimental resources building these Christmas trees. Sort of an exhortation to the community. Let's do something really valuable here. And so this unleashed a sort of torrent of study of all this empirical data that was coming back through the game. And so he said, I have been painstakingly going through all of the lab design submissions by brand new players. And I was chagrined to find a dozen Christmas trees were submitted. Let us not waste our precious few design slots. And so over time, the players actually got better and better and better at designing RNAs. And in fact, we kept making the puzzles harder and harder and harder. And so if you plot all the blue points, the computer algorithm, which is not learning, was getting worse and worse.
Can you just say, what does he mean by Christmas trees?
Well, this is, I should first say this is not an official technical term. I should also say that I think questions are coming at the end of this speech, but I'll answer your question, which is, it just so happens, I think we made this up, in the game we colored G nucleotides red and C nucleotides green. And it turns out that G and C Watson-Crick pairs really love to be close to one another. And we accidentally told the players in the tutorial this. And the players actually started off as rather unsophisticated scientists. They said, oh, if these really bond together really well, we should just use them all the time when we design RNAs. But of course, that's not at all what nature does. And so this is one of the players, this is our first glimmer of learning in the game, where one of the players said, maybe this isn't such a good idea to just use only G's and C's to design these RNAs. Let's think about this a little bit more, and let's try and work a little harder to design interesting RNAs. So that's where the term Christmas tree comes from. Anyway, so So this was a really, really astonishing thing, and it's actually sort of difficult to know from the outside what's going on here and why the players are even doing better. And I remember talking on chat with one of the players who's incidentally sort of become well known globally for playing this game, Eli Fisker, and he said, well, it's really easy. we noticed the computers making the same mistakes over and over again. And we just sort of chose not to make those mistakes anymore and to do something different. And we started to learn how to create RNAs that fold properly, empirically. So that's really exciting. And in fact, to a point made earlier, not only has this been published in PNAS, a very major journal, but what we did was we actually analyzed computationally what the players were doing and were able to extract some new and heretofore unknown theories of RNA folding from theories the players had developed about how RNAs fold. So really, really exciting stuff. Sort of original science being done by non-scientists in the context of a game. Partially, one of the reasons why this works is because a lot of people sign up to play these games. I should say many more than actually end up playing the games. So you could view these sorts of games in some ways as a giant filtration mechanism over large numbers of people for those who are actually good at this and have the inclination to play it. And one of the things about this also that was really astonishing to us is the motivation of the players to win the game and to get more points than one another and to learn science just to beat one another at this game. And it reminds me of a colleague of mine at Carnegie Mellon, Luis von Ahn, a very famous leading light in crowdsourcing, gave this piece of advice, which is that if you're going to create a crowdsourcing game, don't just give the players points. Give them lots of points. They love that. Another interesting aspect about creating these games is, and this was brought up in some of the earlier talks, is just how much the science matters to people, actually. And one of the really surprising things about this was when we first created Foldit, believe it or not, the idea was to hide that there was any science involved. And we wanted to sort of sublimate the science behind this game and then trick the players into contributing to the world. And in playtesting, it turned out that exactly the opposite was the case. The more that we suffused the game with real scientific terms and scientific knowledge, so we started just putting in a sort of a Wikipedia for the types of things that the players were dealing with, the more people were excited to play the games. And so it's sort of a reminder when you're outside of science, you sort of forget that it's actually sort of a romantic discipline to a lot of people. It's a very exciting thing to do. And I should say, also at this point, some of our top players have actually begun doing sort of original science in the games. And so we just a month or two published a paper in Journal of Molecular Biology called What Makes RNA Puzzles Hard, about the player's experience, about why it's hard or easy to design various RNAs. And I think either the first or second author was one of the players. In fact, the first author was a player. Final point I want to make that was really affecting and totally surprising about making these kinds of games is how much it meant to the players themselves and what it meant for people to discover that they themselves could do something that they weren't aware of. And the BBC actually made a documentary about some of our players, and I just want to share a moment that I thought was very emotional. So this is one of the top folded players in the world.
With a protein that is so misshapen, it's ugly and it's red, and to work through that to a beautifully streamlined structure where it's symmetrical and things are tucked in and nothing is hanging out of the sides. Yeah, that is sort of the goal, and that's what I like doing, to sort of help it in some ways, to sort of be what it should be. I'm an administrative worker in the rehab team. I'm just answering telephones, working on bespoke computer programs, interacting with staff. It's very repetitive. When I go home, I become a different person. I just like to measure myself against something, and it's given me something that my everyday life hasn't given me. Is to just use abilities I didn't know I had.
So I hope one of the message here is that when we think about crowdsourcing, it doesn't just have to be about picking objects and images or object detection tasks. As important as it is to solving global warming and other important things, it can also mean solving some of the most difficult and truly intellectually complex problems at the boundary of human knowledge. So that's why I think that this field is so exciting, and I just want to acknowledge some of the people who helped found both these two projects with me, and thank you.